I've heard some pretty wild first date stories in my time. Once, a friend of mine went on a date with a guy who brought his pet parrot along. A parrot? On a date? Needless to say, things didn't go so well. Apparently, the parrot wasn't a big fan of my friend and kept trying to bite her earrings. Now, I'm all for bringing your authentic self on a date, but maybe leave the feathered friends at home for the first meeting. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? First dates can be a roller coaster of emotions. You're excited, you're nervous, you're trying to remember to breathe and not spill your drink all over yourself. It's easy to get caught up in the moment and miss those little warning signs. But while first dates are all about getting to know someone, it's also important to be mindful of certain red flags that could signal it's time to move on. So, grab your metaphorical magnifying glasses, because today we're diving into 5 first date red flags that mean it's time to say thank you next and run for the hills. Red flag 1, the controlling conversationalist. Have you ever been on a date where it felt like you could barely get a word in edgewise? The person who just loves the sound of their own voice a little too much? That, my friends, is our first red flag, the controlling conversationalist. This is the person who treats your date like a one-person show. Starring them, of course. They might launch into long-winded stories without coming up for air, interrupt you constantly, talk over you, or conveniently change the subject whenever you try to share something about yourself. It's like trying to have a conversation with a runaway train, exhausting, frustrating, and definitely not a two-way street. Now, it's one thing to be passionate and animated in a conversation. That's great. But it's another thing entirely to dominate it completely. A healthy conversation involves a give and take, a genuine interest in what the other person has to say. If your date seems more interested in hearing themselves talk than in getting to know you, that's a major red flag. And remember, you deserve to have your voice heard, your thoughts and feelings validated. Don't be afraid to politely excuse yourself from the conversation if it starts to feel one-sided. You're there to connect, not to be a captive audience. Red flag 2, disrespecting your boundaries. Another red flag to watch out for is when someone doesn't seem to respect your boundaries. Boundaries are like our personal space bubbles. They protect us and help us feel safe and comfortable. Respecting someone's boundaries means asking permission before touching, not pressuring you to drink or do things you're uncomfortable with, and listening when you say no. Now, this red flag can sometimes be a little trickier to spot because it might not always be as blatant as, say, someone ignoring a direct no. It could be more subtle, like someone making you feel pressured to share something personal before you're ready, or making repeated comments or jokes that make you feel uncomfortable even after you've asked them to stop. It's important to remember that you have the right to set boundaries, and anyone worth your time will respect them. If someone is constantly pushing your boundaries or making you feel uncomfortable, that's a sign that they might not be the right fit for you. And never, ever feel like you have to minimize or apologize for your boundaries. They're there for a reason, and it's perfectly okay to stand your ground and say, "This is important to me." Red flag 3, the fake it till you make it attitude. Now let's move on to a red flag that can be harder to spot but just as important to acknowledge, the fake it till you make it attitude. We all want to put our best foot forward on a first date, right? We might wear a nice outfit, tell a funny story, maybe even embellish our accomplishments just a tad, don't judge. But there's a big difference between putting your best foot forward and completely fabricating a persona. This red flag is all about someone trying to portray a false version of themselves, especially if they're trying to impress you. You might notice this if they're constantly bragging about things they haven't actually achieved, name-dropping celebrities they've never met, or acting like they have interests they don't. It's like they're reading a script of the perfect date instead of just being themselves. Here's the thing, authenticity is magnetic. When you're with someone who is genuinely themselves, it's easy to relax, be yourself, and truly connect. But when you sense that someone is putting on a front, it can be exhausting trying to keep up with the charade. Red flag 4, the overly negative Nancy. So, you've recognized a red flag? What do? Well, you don't have to stick around and suffer through the rest of the date. You get to decide how you want to spend your time, and it's more than okay to excuse yourself from a situation that isn't serving you. This brings us to our next red flag, which is a biggie, the overly negative Nancy. Now, we all have our bad days, and it's normal to vent or share frustrations sometimes. But someone who constantly complains or speaks negatively about everything can be a major mood killer. Think about it. Do you want to spend your precious time with someone who sucks the joy out of everything? I didn't say amen out loud, did I? Because I did. It's just not fun to be around someone who's always looking for the cloud in every silver lining. Pay attention to how your date talks about their life, their experiences, and other people. Are they constantly complaining about their ex, their job, the service, the weather? Do they find something negative to say about everything on the menu? If so, that's a sign that they might have a negative outlook on life in general. Red flag 5, the inconsistent communicator. And finally, let's talk about a red flag that can be a deal breaker for many. The inconsistent communicator. Communication is key in any relationship, and dating is no different. Inconsistent communication can be a sign of disinterest, disrespect, or even just a lack of effort. This red flag can manifest in many ways, such as taking days to respond to messages, giving mixed signals, or being hot and cold in their interactions. One minute they're showering you with attention, and the next they're ghosting you for days on end. It's confusing, frustrating, and can leave you feeling like you're on an emotional roller coaster. Remember, you deserve clear, consistent, and respectful communication from someone you're dating. You shouldn't have to play guessing games or wonder where you stand. If someone is consistently inconsistent in their communication, it might be a sign that they're not ready for a committed relationship or that they're not truly invested in getting to know you. And hey, life happens. Sometimes we get busy or forget to respond to a message right away. But if inconsistent communication becomes a pattern, it's important to address it and see if it's something that can be changed. Look, I know leaving a date early can feel awkward, kind of like trying to sneak out of a crowded theater during the quietest part of the movie. But remember, you're not obligated to stay in any situation that makes you feel uncomfortable, disrespected, or just plain bored. Your time and energy are precious, so don't waste them on someone who isn't right for you. If you do find yourself needing to make a graceful exit, there are a few things you can do. First, try to find a natural stopping point in the conversation. Maybe there's a lull, or you've finished your meal. Then, simply express gratitude for the date, saying something like, "This was fun, but I should probably get going." And if all else fails, there's no shame in the prearranged excuse. Have a friend call you with a fake emergency that requires your immediate attention. Just be sure to give your friend an Oscar-worthy performance beforehand. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever encountered any of these first date red flags? What are your go-to strategies for bouncing from a bad date? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's have a laugh and support each other on this wild ride called dating.